One of the most acclaimed streaming series in recent memory, FQ's Shōgun, was based on a 1975 novel by author James Clavell. That same book had already inspired a memorable 1980 TV miniseries, which was also widely praised. If your dad watched the History Channel in the 90s, you probably spotted the gigantic VHS box set on his shelf. But what you might not have realized is that both the book and the subsequent miniseries were grounded in real Japanese history, providing a solid, though fictionalized chronicle of the formation of the Tokugawa Shogunate. Today, we're diving into what actually happened in Japan after the events depicted in Shōgun. But first, make sure you've subscribed to the Zeus History Channel. Then drop a comment letting us know what other aspects of Japanese history you'd like to hear about. Clavell's novel Shōgun is historical fiction. Emphasis on the second word, but the central relationship between a European sailor and a powerful feudal lord facing a political crisis draws inspiration from the real story of English navigator William Adams and his time advising Japanese feudal lord Tokugawa Ieyasu. The book's setting also mirrors Japan at the start of the 17th century, at the close of the Sengoku period. The Sengoku, or Warring States period, was a century of political and social upheaval. The central authority of the Ashikaga shogunate was weakening, and regional feudal lords took advantage of the power vacuum to expand their domains, often triggering violent conflicts and rivalries. Against this backdrop, several leaders later known as the Great Unifiers brought these conflicts to an end by centralizing power and gradually replacing the Ashikaga shogunate with a new system. One of these figures was Toyotomi Hideyoshi, a former samurai of peasant origins who rose through the ranks to become Japan's de facto ruler, even though he never officially held the title of shogun. In 1598, as his health began to fail, Hideyoshi appointed a council of 5 elders to govern the country until his 5-year-old son, Hideyori, was old enough to rule. The most powerful member of this council was Lord Tokugawa Ieyasu, who controlled the Edo province. Also in 1598, a 34-year-old Englishman named William Adams set sail east from Rotterdam with a group of Dutch merchants and his brother, Thomas. The journey proved incredibly harsh. During a resupply stop on the African island of Cape Verde, half the crew contracted a deadly fever that killed the expedition's leader, Admiral Jacques Mahu. By the time the ships reached what is now Argentina, the crew was starving, with some men resorting to eating leather from their clothing and equipment. Even more sailors died from exposure in the freezing conditions of the far south. Finally, in September of 1999, the Dutch vessels entered the Pacific Ocean. On April 19, 1600, after 19 months at sea, just 23 survivors remained out of the more than 100 men who had begun the journey. They anchored off the coast of Kyushu, Japan. By this point, nearly all of them were sick or already dying. In fact, only 9 crew members were able to stand on their own when they arrived in Japan. Their remaining cargo consisted of just 11 chests of trade goods and a small cache of weapons. At the time, the only Westerners living in Japan were Portuguese Jesuit missionaries who acted as interpreters for Adams and his surviving crew. Fearing foreign competition for Japanese influence and favor, the Jesuits told their host that Adams and his men were pirates and advised that they be executed. Adams and a merchant named Jonathan von Lauterstein were sent to Osaka, where they were brought before the powerful lord of Edo province, Tokugawa Ieyasu. Over the course of 3 meetings with Adams, Ieyasu determined that he possessed extensive knowledge of ships and navigation, and would be far more valuable as a living ally than as a dead prisoner. Ieyasu sent Adams to Edo, where he helped train the lord's forces in the use of the cannons he had brought aboard his ship. As tensions grew between Ieyasu and the other members of the ruling council, Adams even served alongside Ieyasu's army in Izu, and later took part in the decisive Battle of Sekigahara, which brought an end to the ongoing military conflict. After his victory at Sekigahara, Ieyasu solidified his control over Japan by rewarding those who had supported him with land and titles. Honda Masanobu, the real-life ally of Ieyasu, who inspired the character Kashigi Yabushige in Shōgun, was one of these lords. Unlike the character's untimely death in the book and series, the real Masanobu went on to become governor of Sato and remained an important ally of Ieyasu. Ieyasu also stripped his enemies of their holdings, revoking many land rights previously held by the former ruler and his still young son, Hideyori. Another key step in securing his power was changing his family name. Although he was originally associated with the Minamoto clan, claiming descent from the Fujiwara clan strengthened his claim to central authority. In other words, Ieyasu began fabricating elements of his family history because, let's be honest, who hasn't embellished a bit during a job interview? In March 1603, Ieyasu was formally named shogun by Emperor Go-Yosei. What's the difference between an emperor and a shogun? Good question. Essentially, the emperor was Japan's supreme leader, ruling with a divinely sanctioned right. The shogun, on the other hand, acted more like a prime minister, the head of the state on the ground, managing day-to-day affairs. Even after years of conflict and military campaigns, Tokugawa Ieyasu technically remained shogun for only 2 years. In 1605, he retired from the position and allowed his son and heir Tokugawa Hidetada to take over behind the scenes. This was likely a strategic move, not only freeing the elder Tokugawa from ceremonial duties, but also helping to secure the transition of power to his son. He effectively continued running the country for the next decade until his death in 1616. However, despite Ieyasu's efforts after Sekigahara firmly establishing him as the most powerful lord in Japan, earning the title of shogun did not completely eliminate his opposition. As depicted in the series, not all of Japan's feudal lords believed Ieyasu was the right man for the role, or that his rise to power was even legitimate. Many continued to support the former ruler's son, Toyotomi Hideyori, who was still living in Osaka with his mother in 1614. The Toyotomi clan rebuilt Osaka Castle, re-establishing themselves as a potential threat to the shogun's authority. The Tokugawas responded by marching their forces on Osaka in a campaign that included Honda Masanobu and his son, Honda Masazumi. An army led by Ieyasu's son, the former shogun Tokugawa Hidetada, destroyed the rebuilt Osaka Castle in 1615, prompting Hideyori and his mother to take their own lives. The Tokugawas then ordered the execution of all remaining Toyotomi heirs, permanently ending the Toyotomi clan and removing the final challenge to the shogun's legitimacy. Think of it as the baptism montage from The Godfather, only far harsher. Both William Adams and his fellow merchant, Jonas de Vanadestine, continued to serve the Tokugawa clan throughout this period. It wasn't until 1611, more than a decade after arriving in Japan, that Adams learned of a British East India Company ship docking in Indonesia. He was finally able to write to them and send word back to his family in England that he was still alive. Adams was not formally granted permission to leave Japan and return home until 1613, though it's unclear whether he ever requested this or was simply content with the new life he had built for himself through his service to Tokugawa. Adams had been given the Japanese name Mura Unjin. He was granted land around Edo and licensed to trade and operate his own business, despite the fact that he already had a wife and child waiting for him back in England. Adams married a Japanese woman, and in 1613 they had 2 children together. That same year, English Captain John Sarius arrived in Japan aboard his ship, the Clove, hoping to establish a trading post for the English East India Company. Tokugawa Ieyasu granted Adams permission to return to England alongside Sarius and his crew. But after spending so many years in Japan, Adams found it difficult to relate to the English sailors and ultimately decided not to return. Adams remained in Japan for the rest of his life, earning a living by helping European powers, including the Dutch and the English, establish trade partnerships in the East. He served as a fixer, translator, and negotiator, and as a Protestant, he was committed to ending the period in which Catholic Spain and Portugal had dominated Japanese trade. Under his guidance, the Dutch secured exclusive trading rights at the port of Dejima, effectively removing it from Portuguese control, while English merchants gained permission to build houses in Japan and trade at ports and marketplaces of their choosing. A permanent settlement for British merchants was established in Hirado. The Tokugawa Shogunate also ushered in a period of relative peace after decades of conflict between rival factions. This stability led to a flourishing of culture and the arts, including the rise of the ukiyo-e style, which celebrated hedonism and beauty. The term ukiyo roughly translates to floating world, reflecting both the joy and lightness of fleeting moments, as well as the melancholy awareness that such moments never last. During this era, kabuki and bunraku theatrical traditions thrived, along with the production of distinctive woodblock prints. Unfortunately for Adams and his ambitious plans, actual trade between England and Japan developed slowly. The primary source of income for his business came from exchanging Chinese goods for Japanese silver, a far shorter and more practical route than shipping goods between Japan and London. At one point, Adams even attempted to organize expeditions to search for a rumored northwest passage from Asia to Europe, which would have dramatically reduced travel times. However, none of these plans ever came to fruition within the next decade. As a result, the English East India Company eventually withdrew from the Japanese market due to a lack of commercial success. Tokugawa Ieyasu died in 1616 at the age of 73, with his son Hidetada already long established as the formal shogun. Before his death, Ieyasu requested to be deified so that he could continue protecting his descendants from evil, and somehow that request was granted. He was posthumously renamed Tosho Daigongen, or Great Gongen Light of the East.
With Gongen being a kind of Buddha, Hidetada further strengthened the Tokugawa dynasty's central authority by marrying Kazuko, the daughter of Emperor Go Mizuno. Their daughter later ascended the throne as Empress Meisho. As with most royal hierarchies, it was essentially a long-running soap opera. In 1618, Adams attempted to resolve a dispute between Dutch and English merchants in Hirado. He appealed directly to Shogun Hidetada, but received no assistance, making it clear that his special relationship with the father carried little weight with the son. During a trading expedition to Tonkin, in present-day Vietnam, Adams contracted a tropical illness. He eventually died in May 1620 in the Japanese city of Hirado, dividing his possessions between his English and Japanese families. By the time his inheritance reached London in 1622, his English wife, Mary Hine, had already passed away.
Adams was not actually the last of his original crewmates to remain in Japan. Melchior van Santvort and Vincent Romaine continued to live relatively quiet lives in Nagasaki. In 1635, Hidetada's successor, Shogun Tokugawa Iemitsu, issued the Sakoku Edict, intended to eliminate foreign influence from Japan, particularly Christianity. Japanese residents of mixed ancestry, likely including Adams's Japanese children, were exiled to Jakarta, Indonesia. And who knows, maybe one day we'll get an acclaimed limited series about them too. So what do you think? What part of the real Shogun story surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our channel.